This panel of philosophers and artists took place on June 7th at the conclusion of our Emptiness and Form exhibit. Enjoy this philosophical discussion.
I'm more interested in what I don't know than what I know, so I'm not going to try to reproduce what I know. So basically, I empty my mind. You know, that's the best way I found to find interesting stuff. And so that's my process. And when I see what I did, sometimes I don't understand, and sometimes it comes to me and I understand. The Chawan in this exhibition, I made some Chawan paintings. Chawan is the tea bowl, Japanese traditional tea ceremony, which I practice. And I was at the time working with a ceramic artist. We were exploring the Chawan. What is Chawan? And he wanted to know how to make a Chawan. And I don't know how to make a Chawan, but I know how to use it. And that's how we developed the whole series of Chawan and an exploration, which really was very interesting. So I guess I was really in the subject. And when I was there in sharing one of these studios, I realized I was painting Chawan. But they are not illustrations, they are not explanations, I don't have a particular concept I want to address, or rhetoric, or a need for aesthetics or personal expression. I don't have any of that because I'm not interested in them. So the paintings are what they are. And sometimes I find them interesting. So that's how I work. And about the subject of emptiness and form, I believe it's a good way of putting it for me, because I love emptiness, I love silence, I love space, and I really believe that's where the most precious things come.
In many ways, throughout my whole life, I've always woven these two threads: the side of the really earthy, the spiritual, the indigenous, and the super modern. Fringe technology development, novel technologies on the data side, and also in real world technologies. And my painting for this exhibition, I've never considered myself an artist, but I was really trying to combine the ancient with the modern. So the painting, the name of the painting is Kepo Keao, the night, the dawn. And I don't know if you can see it, no you cannot, but so basically the technology that I'm currently working on is like a massive vacuum cleaner for the air that pulls carbon out of the atmosphere. It's called direct air capture. And if you think about where does carbon come, or where does ink come from? It's carbon, right? It's ink that is made from biomass or extracted out of the earth. You can see it, it's formed. But pulling carbon out of the atmosphere with a very new technology and making ink out of it has never been done before. So because of a lot of great connections and a lot of favors and a lot of not giving up, making this happen, I was able to get my hands on the first ever ink that has been made out of the sky. And I decided to use that ink to paint my interpretation of the Native Hawaiian creation story. And that is the emptiness into the form. And I think the message here is really that working in this sort of digital era of technology and post-humanism, no matter where we go as a species, we can never ever change where we come from. And the further we're removed from that origin, from the earth, we really need tools and bridges to remember the opposites that we are dealing with. And that's sort of me weaving the threads through, I guess, a piece of art.
My name is Gere. I'm a storyteller from Oahu. I'm known as a storyteller, but for the last 40 years, quietly, with no one watching and showing no one, I'd put together little collages, images I'd cut out from things here and there. Any magazine was subject to my plundering. I put them in catalogs and store them all through these shelves in our extra bedroom. And I retired about 6 years ago, started touring the world telling stories, and many of them center in the place where we're now sitting. Do you know how weird it is to be filling the space between us, the emptiness between us, with the form of these words? Have you ever thought of storytelling as filling emptiness in your head with a form through words? I think of storytelling as a visual art, but there's no visual art to show because it goes on inside.
I guess what I would tell you about the work that's in the show is this. I think that I follow sort of Bachelard's work in that I think a lot of my ceramic work is a love letter to fire in a certain kind of way. And I work in atmospheric kilns, and Hamada talked about these kilns, these 10,000 pot kilns. If you see like a teapot in a museum in Japan, it's usually, one of a small group. There were 10,000 pots in that, but there's 1 or 3 or 5 like very special voices that came out of that process. And in these kind of environments, fire moves through kilns like water. And so the piece that you'll see in the show is an orb. I've been doing them for many years. And what you want to look at, maybe when you see it, is imagine a boulder in water. And imagine fire wrapping around that boulder. And what you're seeing is the wake of that movement. And so my ceramic research a little bit more directly maybe than in my philosophy work, study how fire moves through space. Because you can take ink from the sky, and carbon is an interesting philosophical idea, but when you watch how something burns, organic matter, fire follows where water has been before. It burns. If you throw bamboo into a fire and you watch it burn, it'll split apart and it'll run up the same way the water traveled up and down the bamboo. And so what I try to do is create environments in which we can participate in how that movement works.
All right, that was good. Really interesting because my work are these small sort of constructions of space. And I'm going to do the philosophy version, and then you can look at them and get the visual version. But they are experimentations in what happens when you use heat as an influence. So in what he's talking about fire, it's what happens in that transitional phase in the kiln. After you surrender it, you've made it and done the thing, and then you put it in and you surrender it, and you have no idea actually what's going to happen. You guess, and you get better at guessing, right? As you do it for many years. And what's also the most fascinating for me about the work is it's always an experimentation. And you're always surprised by something new that comes out. So my work is fired and healed back together so it can structurally support itself. And you can look at it. If it didn't have both the elements playing with each other, they wouldn't work. It would literally collapse into dust and be a different pile on the table.
I had become enamored with the idea that when you have a molecule and you have atoms that make the molecules, that inside of that is a whole lot more space. And from physics I learned that only 4% of the universe is in form at any one time. That's a lot of unknown. That's a lot of emptiness. And if you drill down to anything solid far enough into the micro world, it's just more empty space. And that blew my mind. That interested me too. And I have to thank Tim because and I'm also a student of Zen, which pulled me into that same arena of, I don't understand this logically, but it is doing something to me. It's activating something. I always approach every art piece. I'm very experimental. During COVID, gave me the chance to finally get into casting resin. And but I just figured that there is shaking hands with the unknown every time. I have no idea what I'm going to do. It's very intuitive, but things start to fall into place. and I follow this kind of intuitive, almost synchronistic line or thread that takes me into a piece. And it reveals something. So I never go into an art piece saying, this is what I'm going to do. I always go in saying, what wants to be revealed? And it's revealing it to me. And I then present it, and if I can talk about it, I do. But I have to thank Tim for this particular topic, because this is my topic, you know? It's like, here we go. And I had never done a piece before. All my work is based somehow in science, and another thread that brings me into the void or the emptiness is the Native Americans of the Pacific Northwest who I hung out with, and they're the critter, you might say, that they assigned to fly into the void and into that emptiness and bring something back that transforms the earth is the raven. So raven has been my bird. It was when I was a practicing artist in the Pacific Northwest for 30 years. And here, I moved here and find out it's the most endangered bird in the United States. It's the Hawaiian raven, the alala. And there were only 20 left in the world. Now it's up to 120. But I am so, I just feel like that bird has been a symbol of that same unknown or that same nothingness. And so that thread in mythology has been really strong in the work as well. But this one I really appreciate being able to do.
And I define my practice as creating characters of mothers that reveals something that questions the Western way of the materials. When Tim told us about the topic last year, I was about to start an artist residency, and I knew already that I was ready to cut my hair. And I was telling Gabe, like, I don't think he remembers me with my actual hair long, but I started my PhD with my natural hair long, and I have had possibly 10 colors and 10 different hairstyles. But I didn't want to cut it just for the sake of cutting it or for the sake of a hairstyle. And I went into, there's this Mine Hills Falls, is a falls in Mine Hills, New York, that my family and I have been visiting since COVID through every season. So we have seen how the water patterns change, how some trunks fall and change their space in the waterfall, and we have seen the trees change. And I started thinking about the practice of how common we see animals when they shed and molt, but when we speak about humans, especially for women, about molting or shedding our hair, we see it as sickness or weakness, or like they must be sick. And I can feel it, like after cutting it, how people who don't know me sort of like, their first approach is sort of like pity, like they feel like I'm sick. So with that in mind, I created a ritual to cut my hair, which is documented in a video, and that's a different piece. And for this, originally I wanted to create a big piece using the hair, but doing the testing, I realized that the small pieces naturally took the enso shape, especially the ones that are not dyed. I had natural hair and then my dye hair. And I played with those, with the dye hair and with the natural hair, and sewing them into canvas and watercolor. And then because it's a gallery, you're used to putting a frame and a glass. It didn't feel quite right for me. Again, I'm a performance artist. I believe in the live art form and what it can reveal or question. So the pieces are the only frame pieces without a glass intentionally. I see them as an extension of the performance, as frame performances. And with the weather, the hair itself will change, the shape, the form. And I hope that with those changes, the same as with the trees in the fall, that we could continue to question what does it mean to create, whether intentionally or not, and to change, and to take those, whether it's pain, molting, shedding, but seeing it from a different perspective and not as weakness, especially for women, but as a way of re-empowering ourselves.
Thank you, Jeca. So of mine in there is the figurative sculpture it's actually based on Sinead O'Connor. And but originally my idea, I had this vision of doing like this thin mask-like sculpture. I did a few in grad school, and so I made an original sculpture and then did a plaster cast of it so I could press thin clay in, and I wanted to get this thin, very thin, fragile thing. And the point of it was to emphasize that the famous line, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, from the Heart Sutra, is actually referring to the body. The word form is just a translation for the word that actually means the body. And so when the Bodhisattva is teaching this wisdom, this profound wisdom of emptiness, of shunyata, he begins by addressing it and saying it is true of ourselves, all of us, all parts of ourselves. In the Buddhist analysis, there's 5 parts, beginning with rupa, the form, the body, are empty of permanent, substantial existence. And everybody always says emptiness and form is such a paradox. Emptiness is form, form is emptiness. It's such a paradox. And I think if we really understand that it's referring to the body, that's not the paradox, right? That should be the most obvious, that our bodies are the most obvious, empty of permanent, substantial existence. So I always tell my students, think of your body and where did you get it? And so you think of what your parents contributed, and then all the sustenance you've taken in since. And you begin to understand the basic point of the teaching, this profound wisdom of the Heart Sutra, that everything exists in this web of interdependence. And supposedly if you get that, it leads to compassion. That's the enlightenment experience as it transforms, could be potentially transforming of our whole way of being in the world to get that interdependence. And so that's why I wanted to do this. And I was envisioning a sculpture, and then Sinead O'Connor died as I was building my studio last summer, and I started listening to her music. And there was one video where she sings that Elton John Sacrifice. And if you listen to her in the beginning before she sings, she says, I just want to pare it down a little and make it emptier. And oh, okay. And then as she's singing, you know, she says, I love this song. It's a song for singers. And she was singing, and the way the light hit her face, and I was like, yeah, and your face is a face for a porcelain sculpture to illustrate this. Now I wanted to introduce Matt, and I haven't met Matt until just the other day at the Crater, very auspicious place, Christina's partner, and I found out that Matt also is a philosopher and studied at Oregon at the same place that Celia did, and that they have they're one of their teachers, Celia introduced us to. And so this is just the beginning of a dialogue here, but he belongs in this philosophical discussion, and if I had met you earlier, you'd be in this show. But maybe you can say something about your work, and I didn't know until just a few minutes ago that your uncle was Dietrich Velres, one of the most beloved artists in Volcano, and the gallery where the exhibition is named after his uncle.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's quite an honor. I had no idea I'd be sitting here till about an hour ago. So to be here amongst all these artists and philosophers, it's quite an honor. So, and such a diverse group. And along the lines of that idea of the abyss, I kind of feel like that's where I'm staring right now, is into the abyss, a little unprepared. But my name is Matt Holton. I'm from Maui. I grew up in Kula, where the wildfires nearly took my parents' home and took out about 20 homes in their neighborhood. But I'm a runner, a coach, author, artist, and a content creator. And sure enough, Dietrich is my uncle, very close to my family. growing up, his artwork just was everywhere. It was literally outside our bathroom door was one of his prints. It was in all my grandparents' houses, in their condo. So Dietrich was sort of a mythical person in our family, and he's someone that, the myth of him was someone who came to Volcano. And I think there's a parallel why we're all here in this story, which there's something intriguing about this area between the abyss and where like the rainforest is. There's something intriguing about Pele, you know, there's something intriguing about the stories that the trees tell us. And he was not a Hawaiian, but in every element he became a Hawaiian, I think, living here. And sort of the myth is he lived off grid here as long as I could remember, as long as I was alive. And growing up, that just seemed like something so out of the possibilities of what I thought I wanted to do, only to find that I would end up living much like him on a dead-end road in the middle of the rainforest, living off grid. And being inspired by Dietrich, which was someone who had a strong philosophy about his art. Not only was he a great storyteller about Hawaiian mythology, Dietrich was someone who believed that art should be for the masses. And his prints were always very affordable. And his legacy almost was that it became everywhere you went, you would see his work. It was in books, it was adopted everywhere. And I think the philosophy that Dietrich had is kind of amazing that it's the thing that brought us all here and gave us also a space in the void to have a voice for all of us. So it's just an honor to be here, and thank you for having me.
Tim Freeman is unbelievable, and he leads with the greatness of others instead of his own, and he builds bridges between an unbelievable community of people. You really are an incredible philosopher, a great artist, and I have to say, in seeing this show, curating is hard. Getting a group of artists to agree on any one thing is difficult, you know, and it's really on point. And I just want to say thank you in the most genuine, sincere way.
Thank you so much for joining us for this intriguing discussion about artwork and philosophy. We'll see you next time. Aloha.